In the 5th century, St. Augustine described Lent as the annual pilgrimage of joy to experience God's love and mercy. And the Church has used two images from that ever since. The whole idea that we're on a journey, a pilgrimage to Easter. And secondly, the Church has called Lent a season of joy. You would be forgiven for not knowing that, because generally it's all been doom and gloom. But Lent is meant to be a season of joy when we taste again the wellsprings of God's mercy and love. The woman at the well went on an extraordinary journey, physically and spiritually, that day to experience God's love and mercy, and she knew about discovering her salvation. Well, I want to tell you a story about a time in Lent when I made a very similar pilgrimage. In the second year of the Jesuit novitiate in Australia, the Jesuit novices had dropped 120 miles from our first house in Australia, which is at Seven Hill in South Australia. Seven Hill is to this day a parish, a retreat house, and thank God it's a winery. With 40 cents in our pocket for an emergency phone call, for a letter for the police because we're officially vagrants, and with a backpack on our back and a sleeping bag within it, you have to walk the entire 120 miles begging every single day for your food and accommodation. In the pursuit of board and lodging, the novice master told us, you can't tell anybody who you are or what you're doing. You can't trade off being a Jesuit. But we were told, if you were let into somebody's home, once you'd established the extent of their hospitality, you might tell them who you are and what you're doing, just so they wouldn't be anxious they'd invited Jack the Ripper to stay the night. But if in the first instance they wanted to offer the garage and a sandwich, and then they find out you're a Jesuit novice, now they want to offer the guest room and the dining room table, we were told you cannot get an upgrade from coach to first class. Whatever the first offer is what you take. Those 10 days were the only days in my life I've known anything like hunger, even in these most contrived of settings. If I knocked on your door this afternoon, you didn't have a clue who I was or what I was doing, would you let me stay in your home tonight? A couple of people are saying, yes, where the hell were you when I most needed you? People were pretty good about food, and understandably, staying was a very different deal. But I stayed in hostels for homeless men run by the Vincent de Paul. I slept out under the stars in bandstands and broke into a broken down old schoolhouse on the side of the road when it was teeming rain one day. On day 6 of the pilgrimage, which we do in Lent, I arrived in the town of Riverton, and I was drawn by the big blue fluorescent cross that hung over what I was soon to discover was to be the Catholic Church. I walked up the steps at 7 p.m. on a freezing cold night and gave out my spiel, and I met one of the most wonderful priests I have ever met. And at the end I said to the priest, Father, I'm wondering whether you can put me in touch with the local St. Vincent de Paul Society. To which this great Irishman looked at me and said, you're looking at the local Vincent de Paul Society. And I said, well, Father, I'm wondering if you can help. Oh, he said, I'll do something for you. He said, there's a schoolroom behind the church and we don't use it anymore, and there's a bunk bed and there's a shower in it. I'll give you blankets and pillow and towels and everything, and you'll soak to the skin, you water rat. And I'll give you $5 for the local cafe for dinner tonight, and $5 for breakfast in the morning. Then you've got to get lost. Is that a deal? This was the best deal I had had in 6 days. But the next day after breakfast, I left Riverton without telling him who I was or what I was doing. He never let me into his house. A couple of days later, I arrived in the town of Saddleworth, an even smaller little village, and I went to the biggest, grandest house in town. I thought, they're rich enough to be good to me. And there I met the redoubtable Mrs. Mary McMahon. She grilled me on her front doorstep about who I was, where I was from, how I came to be in such need, and where was I going next. I never told a lie. But being a good Jesuit, I didn't tell the whole truth either. And after the interrogation, she plucked herself up to a full 5 foot and said, in her very broad Australian accent, "All right, I reckon I can trust you. You can come in tonight, you can stay with the family. They're all coming over for one of me big bake dinners, all the 6 kids and their wives and kids and husbands and everybody's coming over. One more's not going to make any difference. And then I'll give you breakfast in the morning, then you've got to clear out. Is that okay?" Is that okay? This was fantastic. I slept in a proper bed for the first time in 8 or 9 days. When I got inside her home, I told Mary who I was and what I was doing. She changed dramatically and turned to me and said, "Get out of here." And for a couple of moments I thought she literally meant I had to get out of there. But then she changed again. She said, "You haven't been sent out as a spy, have you?" And I said, "Why would you think I've been sent out as a spy?" And she said, "Well, I'm a Catholic, aren't I? And I go to the local Sacred Heart Catholic Church just down the road here, and the Jesuits look after us from Seven Hill. I've always grown up in a Jesuit parish, and God knows those Jesuits are always going on about a faith that does justice in the world. And I thought you lot must have been plonked all over the parish this Lent to see whether we've been listening to all those sermons all these years." Now that's a tough old parish, isn't it? They send out spies during the week to see whether you're listening to the homily on Sunday. I have recommended this to the Monsignor, I can assure you. I assured Mary I was not a Jesuit spy and complimented her on her extraordinary generosity. And that night I had a wonderful time with her extraordinary family over a long and liquid dinner in the Riesling Valley of Australia. But the next morning after breakfast I was gone. I was now on the last day of the pilgrimage and I arrived in the tiny little hamlet of Watervale. It was Sunday afternoon. I found out later that everybody was off either watching or playing the local football competition, except for the only person I could see in town, a woman who was weeding her front garden beds on the rise as you left town. She was my only option. I walked up the rise, went into her front garden and said, "Hello, I'm Richard Leonard. I'm going through to the Clare district to get work on one of the wineries to get my passage back to Sydney. I have nowhere to stay tonight and nothing to eat, and I'm wondering whether you can help me with either or both." To which she looked up from the garden bed and said, "Are you the Jesuit who stayed with Mary McMahon last night?" I said, "I am, yes, that would be me." And she said, "Oh yes, Mary gave me a call this morning and said to keep a good eye for you out on the road. That's why I'm doing my front garden beds, not my back garden beds as I had planned." And that night, the McMahon family came down and joined the Brisky family, and we had another long and liquid dinner in the Riesling Valley of Australia. Going out to the world was looking pretty good just at this stage. When I got to Seven Hill the next day, I wrote back to that wonderful priest and I said, "Father, you didn't know it, but that night you looked after a Jesuit novice, and if, please God, I'm one day ordained a Catholic priest, I hope I will be as good to anyone as you were such a model of Christian charity to me that night. I hope I will be there for somebody else in the same way." When I got back to Sydney, there was a letter waiting for me from the parish priest, from the pastor. This is what it said. "I was educated by the Jesuits for my entire education in Limerick in Ireland. I hated absolutely every single minute of it. If I'd known what you Jesuits were up to that night, I would have kicked your backside and told you to get out of town. In fact, I think one of the reasons I came to Australia was to get away from the Jesuits. And here you lot have tracked me down in the middle of nowhere in South Australia and pulled the wool over my eyes one more time. Will I ever be rid of you lot? But I knew there was something a little bit different about you. I can forgive myself on this occasion. Because let's face it, you are without question the most articulate, well-spoken beggar I've ever met in my life." I learned 4 things on that road that Lent, and they stay with me to this day. The first thing I learnt on the pilgrimage, physically on that road, which is about a pilgrimage of faith, is you have to travel lightly. The more stuff you take, the tougher the trip. There are people in this church right now who are carrying an awful lot of burdens. Lent is about divesting ourselves. May we walk out of here a little more lightly than we walked in. That's the story of Lent. Secondly, I discovered on that road that most people are basically good. Oh, we can be so negative and cynical now, and sometimes with good cause. There are some disgraceful people around, and sadly there are even some evil ones. But people are basically good. They want to be kind. Lent's about discovering that again, that God's mercy and love comes through human hands so often. The third thing I learnt on that road in Lent was that when I was literally praying for food, talk about give us this day our daily bread, boy does that change the Lord's Prayer when it was actually true that day. I did not know where the next meal was coming from. If your prayer life's gone kaput, maybe you're not praying over realistic things. My prayer life on those 10 days was probably the best it's ever been because it mattered. Sometimes we're praying about peripheral stuff, actually, because when the going gets tough, prayer gets a little easier. And on that road, I did a lot of prayer, a lot of penance, and a lot of fasting. Some of it was not voluntary. Prayer, penance, and fasting. The big three things of Lent. Well, let me tell you something. Prayer, penance, and fasting doesn't change God, because God is unchanging. It changes us. And I think it matters that we do prayer, penance, and fasting so that we can change, so we might know God's love and mercy a little more this Lenten season. So this Sunday, just as the woman at the well came to see saving love in Jesus Christ, may some of us, all of us, let go of those burdens that are weighing us down to the degree we can. Choose to believe again in the goodness in humanity. Pray about essential things, because prayer becomes alive at that point, and be open to change. And then, maybe then, we'll discover what St. Augustine knew in the 5th century, that Lent is actually not about doom and gloom. It's a season of joy to know again God's mercy and love, and to get to Easter to affirm with the entire church that Jesus is the Messiah, the Saviour of the world. Happy Lent.